almost like you're sort of levitating.
By late 1968, the Rolling Stones had released their seventh studio album, Beggar's Banquet. They marked a return to their blues roots after their disastrous experiment with psychedelia. The group collectively breathed a sigh of relief when the reviews came in. Their producer, Gimme Miller, had served them well. They had returned to form. Now with their next album, Let It Bleed, the Stones wanted to cement their new identity as a blues-inspired rock band. The recording of Let It Bleed and the songs written would date back to mid-1968. The group now aimed to hold the position of the biggest rock group in the world. As the Beatles' Revolver had been to Rubber Soul, Let It Bleed was a continuation of Beggar's Banquet. The Beatles had released a self-titled album in November. It split critics who praised their diversity and experimentation, with others dismissing some tracks as avant-garde, pretentious junk. Jimi Hendrix had released Electric Ladyland in October. His third and, unfortunately, his final studio album was groundbreaking, a psychedelic guitar-driven masterpiece that redefined rock music. The Velvet Underground had released their second album at the start of the year. White Light, White Heat, like its predecessor, embraced an unconventional, unpolished style of songwriting and recording while not being as groundbreaking or influential. Like their first album, it too failed to make any commercial impact. In fact, it sold worse, peaking as low as 199 in the Billboard charts. The Byrds had released their fifth studio album, The Notorious Byrd Brothers, at the beginning of the year. For the group, it was innovative and ambitious. It was unfortunately lost in comparison to its contemporaries. The Stones at this point were not happy with their label Decca Records. The argument over the Beggar's Banquet sleeve had left the Stones to compromise with something they didn't really want. Instead of the graffiti-covered toilet cubicle, they now had a blank white cover with Rolling Stones' Beggar's Banquet in bank script font. It also featured the letters RSVP in the bottom left corner. Decca had reworked the cover as a formal invitation to a banquet. This was the last straw. They were contractually obliged to deliver 2 albums for the label. Following that, Decca and the Rolling Stones were part ways. Mick Jagger had finished the filming of Performance. When it was released, it baffled critics who to this day can't make heads or tails of it. Brian, at this point, in the words of Mick, wasn't functioning as a musician. He'd moved into a farmhouse in the countryside. He drank the days away and began to gain more weight. This year, he would seem thrown out of the band, struggle to pursue his own musical endeavors, and ultimately, while all of his house guests left him unattended, he would drown in his swimming pool. Throughout the recording of the album, Brian would struggle to find his niche. He was unable to get it together and doesn't feature on guitar throughout the entire record. He will miss sessions and barely be present when he attends. This is the story of the Rolling Stones' Let It Bleed. A month before the release of Beggar's Banquet, the Stones had gathered in the studio to record one of Mick's songs titled, You Can't Always Get What You Want. When talking later about who had penned the song, Keith later stated, the track was all Mick. Depending on what you read, some believe Mick wrote it about Anita Pallenberg and her disinterest in being in a relationship with him. Others believe Mick was making a comment on the shift in attitude towards the flower power movement, with optimism now beginning to wane. The woman with a glass of wine waiting for her connection was said to be Mary Ann, and Mr. Jimmy, who looked pretty ill, was said to be their producer. Gimme Miller had worked the basics out on acoustic guitar before showing Keith. In the studio, Keith strummed the chords in open E, while Charlie Watts played along a rhythm that producer Gimme Miller had suggested to him. Gimme Miller himself was a drummer, and when Charlie was either unenthusiastic or unable to play the rhythm correctly, Miller decided to play drums for the song. Charlie later said, Gimme Miller wasn't a great drummer, but he was great at drumming on records, which is a completely different thing. Charlie also credited Gimme with making him a better studio drummer. Brian didn't participate in the song at all. He lay on the floor reading newspaper articles throughout the entire recording. Keith would later add the lead. Following this session, recording would stop and not continue until February of 1969. 2 days after the recording, Marianne Faithor suffers a miscarriage, which devastated both her and especially Mick. He was longing to have a child with Marianne, while at the same time, she was still legally married to her husband, John Dunbar, who was still hoping they would reconcile. On December 4th, a launch party was held in the Gore Hotel in Kensington for Beggar's Banquet. Originally, they'd wanted to hold it at the Tower of London to continue the medieval theme, but it wasn't available. The group, along with 120 media guests, ate a 7-course meal over candlelight. They sat eating dressed in Dickensian suits. Afterwards, a food fight commenced, starting with Mick pushing a custard pie in Brian's face. Brian reveled in this, according to some, because it made him feel he was part of the group. Fights began being thrown with Charlie and Bill ducking down, and the owner of the house attempting, unsuccessfully, to shield himself with a copy of Beggar's Banquet. Keith wasn't present at this point. The event hit the news and Mick wrote a letter to the Gore Hotel thanking them and apologizing for the mess. Brian, during this time, had moved into Cotchford Farm. He was in a relationship with Suki Potier, though he still missed Anita Pallenberg. When he was unpacking his luggage into his new home, he came across a picture of Anita. His father witnessed him whispering her name over and over. At this point, Mick was thinking of other ways to promote the songs on Beggar's Banquet, other than a press conference or live concert. It had now been 7 months since the group had performed a live show. Mick now hired director Michael Lindsay Hogg to direct a television show. It was decided to play a recorded live set mixed with circus-themed entertainment amongst a carnival atmosphere. Set in a big circus tent, the event would be aired on the BBC at Christmas and feature groups such as The Who and John Lennon's supergroup, the Dirty Mac. The rock and roll circus Mick envisioned being a groundbreaking fusion of music and spectacle. On the 11th of December, the Stones and several other groups gathered at Wembley Studios. The Stones put the money up for the event themselves, as this would give them complete creative control. The group's wives and family were in attendance, and though Yoko Ono, Marianne Faithfull, and Anita Pallenberg were included in the production, Brian, Bill, and Charlie's girlfriend weren't considered. The supergroup known as the Dirty Mac, according to Bill Wyman, was to feature him as the bassist. But as Keith wanted to be part of the group, and seen as John Lennon was playing electric rhythm and Eric Clapton was playing electric lead, he would have to take Bess. Acrobats, jugglers, clowns, and fire eaters performed in between sets. The event was fun but haphazard. While John Lennon was asked what amp he wanted to use, to which he replied, "One that plays," news came and the boxing kangaroo wouldn't be arriving. Other reports about the boxing kangaroo state, Yoko Ono approached Michael Lindsay Hogg and told him, should the event feature boxing kangaroos, Lennon wouldn't be involved. The event began on noon on the 11th of September, Mick acting as ringmaster with the Stones of Lennon miming, trumpets and flutes. Originally, each of the Stones was to introduce the acts, but Brian and Bill's parts were later cut. Brian and Bill's introductions were later included as an extra in the 2019 DVD. Lennon's introduction was later filmed while Michael Lindsay Hogg was shooting the Beatles' Get Back sessions. When all was said and done, the Stones watched back the performance on film, but Mick was unhappy. He insisted it was not up to standard. He felt they'd been upstaged by The Who, and their performance looked unimpressive. Michael Lindsay Hogg argued their set was a perfect climax to the film. The Stones didn't agree, and it was decided to reshoot the performance.